Hi, welcome. It's episode 152 of Grow Yourself Up. And today I'm going to do a solo episode talking about books that I have found really, really useful and that I return to in my own healing and recovery journey. So, therapy has been life saving and life changing for me. And I always recommend going to therapy when you're trying to recover from childhood trauma and developmental trauma and traumatic stress because we need a healing relationship to help us as we heal that rupture with ourselves. And also, we need other sources of support. We need community. We need friends. We need, often we need recovery groups. So we might need to go to 12-step groups or other, sometimes there's mothers groups that are really helpful, a mother's circle or a group that are focusing on healing after like traumatic birth or postpartum depression. And also, I have personally found books incredibly helpful. I call it bibliotherapy because often when I have not been understood in my close circles, I have found such profound understanding and recognition and support in books. And the magical thing about books is they are always there with you. So, when we have therapy likely for 1 hour a week. There are 168 hours in a week, 24 hours in those 7 days. So 24 times 7 is 168. And we are having therapy for just one of those hours. So we've got 167 other hours to be left with ourselves and to be left with our brains that tell us things about ourselves that are not helpful, to be left with if we're suffering from anxiety or depression, if we're having any kind of struggles, if we're really struggling with intrusive thoughts or a lot of OCD rituals. It can be really, really stressful to have kind of only 1 hour of support a week. And I personally have found such comfort in books, such profound comfort. And, often your close people may not understand you. They may not resonate with your experience. They may be defended against some of their own experience. So recognizing your experience might feel too threatening to their own sense of self. And so books can be a real lighthouse and a beacon of hope when we are in the depths of depression or feeling really anxious or feeling hopeless, because sometimes in the middle of the night or on a weekend or indeed over this Christmas period, things can feel really dark. And so I want to offer you some resources that you might also really resonate with and that can provide so much comfort. It's really comforting when we hear elements of our own story written down or spoken by someone else. So I'm going to share a selection of books, like general life books. And I could do so many of these. I could do so many on dating. I could do some on motherhood. Because books, I'm like drowning in books where I live because I've got so many books. And that's kind of a topic for another conversation because perhaps I'm hoarding books. But anyway, I wanted to share some books that have really been like guideposts or like signposts in my own life as I heal from childhood trauma and really try and work to create the life that I want to live. Okay, so I'm going to go from like kind of the general to more specific. So the first one I want to talk about is A Return to Love. So if you're going to watch this on YouTube, I'm going to hold the book up now because I don't like audiobooks. I like having a paper book in my hand. So this is A Return to Love. It's by Marianne Williamson. Lots of people have an issue with her, but I think she's written some really beautiful books. And this book, A Return to Love, is based on another book called A Course in Miracles. She did not write A Course in Miracles, but Return to Love is a very beautiful book when you are trying to kind of help yourself think in a new way. So when we've had childhood trauma, we have a lot of fear, often terror, a lot of shame, and a lot of a sensation of waiting for the other shoe to drop, i.e. we're often waiting for more bad things to happen because we have had bad things happen. There has been evidence in our lives that things have not been good. And particularly when that happens in childhood, you kind of believe that maybe that's the way life just is, that bad things happen. And I really have had to train myself in various ways in my thought processes to believe that I could have a different reality. And this book was one of the kind of early books I read, which really helped me with that. Because broadly, the book says that you either are in a state of fear or you are in a state of love. And typically, when we've had a lot of trauma, we would operate from a place of fear because we haven't kind of got we're not securely attached, first of all. So we don't think the world, we don't kind of view the world through this benevolent lens. And I have really had to make a shift from the state of operating from a place of fear to a state of love. And, you know, if you kind of listen to this from a nervous system lens, you might think, oh no, we have to shift our nervous system state in order to get to that place. But really, there's a feedback loop between our thoughts and our nervous system state. And I've had to work, and many people, we have to work on this, where we're prepared to envision something different or imagine something different, to imagine the possibility that there is something different. And that is cognitive work, because I was still quite dysregulated in my nervous system at the point that I could envision this, and it was still possible. So she broadly talks about how we have to try and shift to a state of operating from a place of love and imagine what that might look like for our life, instead of constantly operating from a place of fear. And there's some very specific examples in this book which I found really helpful. And often when I was in many different situations, I would notice how I was acting from a place of fear and essentially expecting the worst, rather than thinking, okay, what is the best thing that could happen here? Or what would it look like for me to act from a place of love? And I think it's a very relevant position to adopt, particularly at this time in the world where we are so kind of polarized and there's kind of so much tragedy going on. So I'm just going to read you something from the foreword from Return to Love. She says, hatred is the spiritual malignancy of our species and, like any other form of cancer, does its most terrible work not outwardly, but within us. The fear behind it literally eats us alive, destroying minds, bodies, cultures, nations. External remedies can manage its effects, but only love has the power to undo it. Undo it we must. From foreign war to domestic catastrophes, our work is the work of casting fear from the world. We do this not only to serve ourselves, but most important, to serve our children. They shall inherit what we bequeath to them, and there is no greater gift to future generations than what we do, than we do the work God has asked us to do, love one another, that the world might be made right. Fear unchecked grows exponentially. Love poured forth has the power to remove it. This is the power of God in our lives. If a return to love makes one iota of difference in anyone's ability to experience that power, then I am exceedingly glad I wrote it. I wish you miracles. I wish you love. So those are Marianne Williamson's words. But I think that when I've talked before on this podcast about how, from the point of view of kind of evolving as a species and looking at our collective consciousness, we need to own our shadow, really looking at our fear, and everything else that's in our shadow is part of that. And we really have to claim that and do an internal transformation rather than constantly acting from fear. Because when we are in fear, that's when we try and have power over. That's when we have domination. That's when we try and, when we have fear and shame about our children, that's when we try and go into controlling them and being overly harsh with them, because we have gone into fear. So really coming back and doing the internal work in all the ways we can to look at where can I replace fear with love. And obviously I'm not going to go into this book in more detail, but it's a very beautiful book to help make that transition so that you too believe that you can have a beautiful life and that that's possible for everyone. And this work, we have to do this work individually to make shifts collectively. So I found that book really helpful because in many ways in my life, I was like, I really had really wanted to find a partner and have children. And in my own family, I'm the eldest of 5 children, one who's died, so the eldest of 4 living children. And I was the last one to find a partner. So my sibling who's like nearly 10 years younger than me had partnered up and married before I found a partner. And I sort of had begun to think, these things are not going to be for me. I'm not going to get to have a partner and have children. And kind of makes me want to cry. And I'm like, my life is not going to turn out the way I want it. But being in that position, if I really sat in that position, it wouldn't change. So I really needed support to believe I could have a different life from what I thought was possible. And that book really helped me in making conscious steps, things like online dating or going out to try and meet someone. You have to really set aside fear. And it's very vulnerable to really sort of acknowledge what you really want. It's easier to stay in a defended position of not acknowledging wants and desires. And I had to really move into a state of believing this is possible and I can operate from a place of love for myself to bring in more love to my life. And that book really, really helped with that. So let's return to love with Marianne Williamson. The second book, which really helped me, is called Women Who Love Too Much. I'm going to hold that up as well, by Robin Norwood. Now, this is a real classic about essentially when basically women who love unavailable men or unavailable partners, if you perhaps love unavailable other women. But this book was written in 1985, so it is dated. If you pick it up now, you will notice it's dated in the language, in just various kind of cultural things. It's quite dated, but this book really, really helped me to understand some of my patterns because, and this particularly applies to children who've grown up in families with addiction. So if you too have had a father or a mother who's an alcoholic, you may fall into this bucket of women who love too much. The title, I don't like the title because women who love too much are only women who love too much because they have not received enough love in their own childhood. I feel like there should be an addendum to this to say, this is you because you haven't received what you need and you didn't get enough love in your own childhood. But basically, when we have learned that being in love means being in pain, we're loving too much. When we excuse bad behavior, when we read a self-help book and then we focus on all the issues with our partner, when we don't like many of the basic characteristics of our partner, but we put up with them, and think that if we can be good enough or attractive enough, then they want to change for us. All of that is indications of us loving too much, not valuing ourselves enough, not having boundaries to protect ourselves, not focusing on our own lives, like constantly focusing outwards. And that is a product of growing up in a family where you don't get your needs met and where you learn to be, to people please, to be a perfectionist, to be what is often called codependent. And then we're set up to seek, because basically we choose partners based on what love felt like at home, what we thought love was. And when we've had parents who are avoidant or emotionally unavailable, then we think that that's what love is. So we think that love means us trying hard and completely overextending ourselves. And this book, I read this, I think after both my parents had died. And when I was in the beginning of kind of dating, no, actually, no, it was not after they both died. It wasn't actually. But anyway, I read that after a major relationship that I was in broke down, and I could really see my patterns where I had just completely kept on trying and just thinking if I try hard enough, if I be more pleasing, if I put on better clothes or better makeup or do this or that, it's going to help. No, it doesn't, because I'm totally externally focused, and we learn to be totally externally focused in families where we are not seen, where we don't get what we need, and when we're constantly toiling for everyone else in the family. So the title, I mean, I know I'm going on about this, but the title annoys me because it makes out like it's our fault. It's not our fault that we love too much. It's because we have not got what we needed. But in adult life, if we do want to have loving relationships, we do have to really pull ourselves back into ourselves, stop acting like we're responsible for like idiotic people around us, and take responsibility for our own lives and our own patterns. And this book, because it's got a lot of case studies, I really could see my behavior. My scales fell off my eyes in terms of, wow, look what I'm doing. Look at the major ways in which I'm abandoning myself and neglecting myself in order to stay in this ridiculous suboptimal relationship, and in order to try and get people who are completely unavailable to try and be there for me in some way, in ways that they cannot actually ever be there. And so that it's kind of, it's a bit disheartening when you discover that you're like that. Or you kind of really see your patterns written out for you. But it's also, it just gave me so much hope, and I could really, really see what was going on for me. So that's Woman Who Loved Too Much by Robin Norwood. It is dated, because it's from 1985, but I think that book really, really helped me. So if you are kind of trying to look at the way you behave in relationships, and that's not specific to love relationships, that those patterns play out in all relationships and adult friendships. If you're constantly toiling in groups, trying to control everything, or there's lots of patterns that recur repeatedly, which are where you are constantly outwardly focused on other people instead of turning inwards to your needs and taking responsibility for what you're doing and monitoring your own boundaries and things. So that's one. Then there's a Gabor Mate's In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. Now, I found this really a very, very beautiful book. This is, the subtitle of this is Close Encounters with Addiction. And I only read this book after my dad had died. So my dad died in 2007, so 18 years ago. And this book really, really helped me. Well, first of all, in this book, there's a kind of a dual story going on. Gabor Mate talks about his own shopping addiction. So he was addicted to buying CDs, buying music, and he lived in Vancouver. And he talks about how he was busy before he moved to working with drug addicts on the east side of Vancouver. He worked as he was delivering babies, and he relays stories about how when he was kind of mid-delivery with a woman giving birth, how his own addiction was so strong that he had to go across the city to a music shop to buy the CDs he wanted. And he also talks a lot about what makes us vulnerable to alcoholism and addiction. And this book helped me so much with having compassion for my dad and understanding more about what drove him to drink. And it helped me have compassion for myself, because I have had a terrible shopping addiction, and I got into a huge amount of debt. And there's not actually that much written on shopping addiction. So, and I mean, I think it's really very, very prevalent actually, and it's kind of legitimized because of things like fast fashion and cheap clothing. You can just constantly buy stuff if you earn a salary and you've got a little bit of a kind of disposable income. You can buy a lot of things and kind of get that kind of constant hit from buying clothing and whatever else you might buy. And so in some sense, it's difficult to recognize an issue. In my case, it was really an issue because I built up a debt of £27,000 on multiple different credit cards, and I never really added them up until it really, really confronted me, and I had to add them up and really deal with it. And that debt is paid down, and I don't have debt anymore. But shopping is our best attempt to regulate and to manage our emotions. I used to work in financial services prior to being a psychotherapist in the city in London, and I worked near Liverpool Street. I worked at UBS, and if I had a meeting that was stressful, things were feeling tricky, and actually I worked around Liverpool Street and around Broadgate Circle and Bishopsgate for many years. There was a Reese shop at the end of Liverpool Street station, and I would just go down to Reese and buy myself something. And that's the way that I kind of managed my emotions. I either work harder or do a bit of shopping or find a new boyfriend or something. So, and I can weave, like, as I'm telling you this, it sort of sounds humorous and I can weave a good story about it, but it was extremely painful to live through. And then extremely painful to realize how much debt I had and how I wasn't kind of tending to myself. And yeah, so this in the realm of Hungry Ghosts is extremely compassionate, because Gabor Mate then he moved to working with drug addicts on the east side, I think it's the east side of Vancouver, and engaging in like providing clean needles and really like harm prevention type of work. And where you focus less on trying to get people to give up drugs, you're really trying to help them be where they are and give them like clean needles and whatever else might be necessary so that they can feel supported where they are. And he explains, he like shares some different case studies about people's life stories, and you hear the profound trauma that people have been through and the neglect and the abandonment and the profound pain. And the book really, really helped me kind of hold a wider view about my dad and understand him in the context of his family and what had happened to him, the abandonment that he had suffered. And that was really, for me, and we all have a different relationship with how we hold our parents and what we tell themselves about them. But I have been very, very angry with my parents at different points of my own recovery journey. And that's been really necessary. I felt really angry and I've really blamed them. And then I've come to a place now of more compassion for them. And that feels good for me in my body, because energetically holding on to so much anger for me was not helping me. And this book helped me with compassion for the generational piece around this, because I had a therapist once who said to me, because I was really wanting to blame a lot. And she said, well, you can blame and blame. You can blame your parents, but then you're just going to be blaming back through the generations. And this is my story at this point in time. So please don't take this as me saying that this needs to be your story. Your story will be different. For many of us, like, especially when there's been, in different types of abuse, we can't ever move to a different position, or we don't ever get compassion because the things that happened were too terrible. And indeed, things shift as our own journey shifts. So there's so much nuance and complexity. So you need to know your own story and how you feel about your things. I'm sharing about my story and the journey that I've been on, in kind of conceptualizing how my dad was in our family, and trying to free myself and kind of create a new story for myself, which is not so tied to what I didn't get or how he behaved or how he was with my friends or just whatever went on. And this book, so In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, really helped me, understand addiction from a different lens, even though I've done work in addiction and I've myself been in a treatment facility and I've spent a lot of time in 12-step. Just the way he writes and the compassion he has for all his patients and for himself really helped me. Shopping has been such a big thing for me. After my mother died, I really had a lot of debt, and we had just been dividing up we had to sell our family home because my father had died the year before. My parents were actually divorced, but anyway, we were getting to, that's another story, but we were selling our family home, and I lived in London and I didn't have my own house or flat or anything. So all my stuff was going to go into storage in South Africa on this house. And at that point, I then went to a shop in South Africa, and maybe the South African people know, called Block and Chisel. And I spent an absolute fortune on furniture that I had nowhere to put, and that that just literally have to go in storage because I couldn't ship it to the UK at that point. I didn't have anywhere to have, I didn't have a house to have it, but I was in such a huge amount of pain that was one of the ways that I made myself feel better. I could not process the pain. It was too big. My emotional regulation wasn't brilliant at that point. And so I went shopping to try and make myself feel better, and added massively to my debt. And then that stuff sat in storage for 12 years. And I'm still dealing with the consequences of that stuff, because now some of it's in my house in London and some of it can't even fit. So these ways that we try and soothe ourselves, like, have long-lasting impacts that are, yeah. And I'm kind of sharing this with you very honestly, because this time of year that we're going into is like peak fantasy time, when everyone thinks everyone else has got a happy family. And indeed, there are lots of happy families, I think, but where everyone else thinks everyone's doing this better than me, or no one else is as sad as I am, or no one else is as miserable or as anxious. And if you're in that place, I have also had years like that. And I want to say there is so much hope. There is so much hope. And the hope comes from running towards the difficult things. Nothing is going to heal if you don't go towards it. You have to talk about and acknowledge and process and titrate into and integrate things that have been hard and sad. And you have to kind of move them through your body and process stuff. And I don't think that we talk enough about how kind of varied and non-linear a healing journey is. I now consider that I have a very beautiful life. I'm profoundly grateful for the love that I have in my life, for my beautiful family. I live with my husband and my 2 daughters, and I'm so lucky. I feel myself to be so lucky. I live with the 3 loves of my life, and also the 3 loves of my life sometimes cause me profound pain. Well, I've experienced profound pain in my role as a mother sometimes. So there's always light and dark, and I want to kind of allude to both of those. But there's such a kind of a fantasy around how things are going to be so fantastic at Christmas often. So I wanted to give you this kind of these books in case you need to pull on one of these in this time. Okay, so that one was In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, and honestly, that's fantastic. Talking about addiction, talking about I think it's a very beautiful book, and I love Google Mate, so I think that's a really beautiful book. The last one I'm going to talk about on this episode might be something that's really wonderful this time. Now, this is a fantastic book as well. This is called Healing Through the Dark Emotions. And the subtitle is The Wisdom of Grief, Fear, and Despair. And it's by Miriam Greenspan. And this book, when I have found myself in the depths of profound depression, or feeling devastated with grief, or full of despair, and wondering if anything is ever going to change, and feeling just in a very dark place. At some point I've thought, oh my word, like, I'm just too much. I'm just too much. I've got too many big feelings. I'm so overwhelming for the people around me. I'm just like too much. And I don't think that that's true, but we tell ourselves these things when we carry essentially a lot from childhood, because we haven't had people to help us regulate our own emotions and to learn to be in touch with them in ways that are manageable. And at points, I have just thought, oh, I'm too depressed, or no one else has ever felt as depressed as me, or no one else has ever felt as anxious as me. Now, that's not true. Of course, that's not true. But a part of me has been telling me that. And, if that happens on, I don't know, the 26th of December, and you're not going to see your therapist for another 2 weeks, you need some help then. You need to read something at that point, which is going to be like helping you understand you're not the only person who feels like that. And that being in touch with these big emotions doesn't make you bad, doesn't make you mad. What is that? Mad, bad, or dangerous to know? You're none of those things. You just need some kind of reflection back about your okayness, and to understand that when you've had emotional neglect, emotional experiences can feel really overwhelming and huge. So we, as children, we need containment and we need mirroring. So mirroring is where your parents will be like, oh, sweetie, look at you. Oh, you're looking a bit sad, sweetie. Okay, are you sad because you dropped your rattle? Okay, let me pick up your rattle. I'm here for you. It's going to be okay. So they kind of mirror what is going on for you, your emotional state, by mentalizing. So they are thinking, what's going on for this little treasure? And then they imagine that. So mentalization is not an exact science, but they imagine what would be going on in your mind. They reflect that back to you. You get an understanding of your own internal state, and then they help contain it. So when you're a baby, if you're left to cry uncontrollably, your nervous system will act to keep you alive and will send you into dorsal at some point so that you shut down. Because from a physiological point of view, a baby crying and crying and crying and crying, it's just not going to be good for the baby. And so the nervous system will, you'll go into a place of shutdown or freeze. And the containment would come if the baby is crying and crying and crying, and the parent or the mother or whoever comes to pick up and be like, oh, sweetie, you're so hungry, or you were so scared in the dark, or oh, you really need a nappy change and you're feeling so uncomfortable and your tummy is rumbling because you're hungry. I'm going to feed you now, darling. It's okay. It's okay. I know you're really upset, but I'm here with you now. That contains it. That puts like a firm, warm hug around the baby, and that's containing. So the baby learns, oh, those terrible feelings in my tummy, that's hunger, but I've been crying and now mummy's coming and she's going to help me with that feeling. And I've got this other discomfort around having like a wet bum, but now, oh, she's put on a dry nappy, so now I feel better. So all the discomfort is ameliorated by this loving caregiver, and they probably say what's going on. They're like, oh, you've got a hungry tummy, and oh, you've got a like a wet nappy, so I'm going to help you feel better. So over thousands and thousands and millions of those interactions of that mirroring and that containment, we learn to then mirror and contain ourselves, essentially. And when we haven't had enough of that, we go quickly into our inner child. And so then we have like big displays of emotion. Those of us who have had childhood trauma and who have not had sufficient containment, sufficient mirroring, have had a lot of stress or wounding in our childhoods, will tend to go more into our inner children and operate from a place of anxiety and fear and shame and distress because we haven't had enough of that. And our kind of, we are more fractured in our kind of self states. So the experience of going from different self state to self state is more jarring as well. So there's kind of more of a disconnect in how we present at sometimes with being very polished, and then we go into this like state of like extreme distress. And so we need to learn to mirror ourselves. And I'm going to talk more about this when I talk more about attachment, which is happening in January. We'll talk more about that. This beautiful book, Healing Through the Dark Emotions, really helped me with feeling less kind of messed up, essentially, and less like wondering to myself, why do I sometimes feel so uncontained? And because we need tools to help us with our own with how we talk to ourselves about ourselves. And we ourselves will feel overwhelmed and engulfed by our own emotional experience when we have not had enough containment. I've talked about this in the context of emotional neglect, where we've been neglected, we haven't had enough of our own emotional experience reflected back to us. And so our emotional landscape probably alternates between being very flat and then being very kind of dramatic with all these massive weather patterns. And this book is really helpful in terms of coming to terms with our own kind of big weather patterns of emotions and being there for them and not castigating ourselves and not thinking, oh my word, I'm like a terrible, broken, damaged person. You are not a terrible, broken, damaged person. You're a person who's had wounding. You're the reason that beautiful book by Oprah and Bruce Perry about, what's it called? It's not, what is it? What Happened to You. I can't remember what the title of that book is, but we make sense in the context of our experiences. And to grow ourselves up, we need to learn to be with ourselves, and to tolerate ourselves, and to kind of contain ourselves ultimately, because sometimes there is just not someone else there to do it. Sometimes you can't be with your therapist. Sometimes it's just you and your children, or sometimes you don't have access to a loving friend or a loving partner, or they're tired of being there for you or something. And so we need other ways to help ourselves, and books can be just such a beautiful way to see our experience written down, to help reduce our own shame, and then to practice new ways of being. So I really, really highly recommend this. Healing Through the Dark Emotions by Miriam Greenspan. And I hope that if you have a tricky time sometimes at this time of year, you may really find this book in particular, of all the books that I've listed, and possibly the first one about moving from fear to love, this one I think is a really very beautiful book. And I'd love to hear if it's helpful to have this type of episode, because I could do more on motherhood books or memoir. Because I really love books. And I think that they're really, really, really helpful. Reading other people's stories is very containing and helpful and de-shaming. So I'm sending you so much love. This time of year has the potential to be very tricky, and there's also the potential for great beauty. I am holding the potential for great beauty and for rest and for hibernation and for self-kindness. And I wish the same for you. So sending you all so much love.